Hello. It's so nice to be sharing simple discoveries for a happy and active life with you again. Tell me, have you ever experienced this? Everything seems normal, but you have a nagging feeling of unease or an inexplicable heaviness in your body, an aching pain that just won't go away. We often attribute this to age, the weather, fatigue. But what if I told you that very often our wise body is trying to reach us in this way, to tell us about what we stubbornly keep silent about, carry within us like a heavy stone hidden away? When important feelings, thoughts, and needs remain unexpressed, they don't just disappear. Like invisible roots, they begin to sprout into our physical well-being, causing very real ailments. The habit of being strong, not complaining, not burdening others, this is a quiet, unnoticed enemy of our health, one that saps our strength from within for years, like a woodworm in an antique dresser. But there's good news. By learning to hear these signals and treat them with care, we can reclaim our lightness, energy, and joy in life. And it's simpler than it seems. Stay with me, and together we'll explore these 7 cries of our body to rediscover harmony with ourselves. Chronic, unexplained pain. So, the first and perhaps most common signal is chronic pain, for which doctors can find no clear explanation. This is especially common for the back, neck, and shoulders. Remember the saying, to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's not just a pretty metaphor. Let me tell you the story of Margaret, who is 68 years old. Margaret had always been the life of the party, an optimist at least. That's how it seemed outwardly. But for the last few years, she had been plagued by constant, debilitating pain in her shoulder and neck. Massages, ointments, pills, everything provided only temporary relief. Doctors would shrug. Age-related changes, osteochondrosis, nothing critical. But Margaret felt as if a huge, invisible sack of stones was resting on her shoulders. Her whole life, she was used to caring for others. First her children, then her grandchildren, her husband's aging parents. She always pushed her own desires, her fatigue, her grievances to the background. Not now, later, it's not important. That's what she told herself. She felt awkward asking for help, believing she had to handle everything herself. But inside, a dull resentment was building up towards her children, who rarely called, her husband, who took her care for granted, and her friends, who, it seemed to her, had easier lives. But to say it out loud? No way, that's selfishness. That's weakness. And so, this unexpressed heaviness, this suppressed resentment, transformed into that very pain in her shoulders. It was as if her body was saying, "Mistress, I can't carry this anymore." One day, after a particularly agonizing week, Margaret, sitting alone, suddenly started saying everything that had boiled up inside her out loud, just into the empty room. She spoke and cried. Then, after calming down a bit, she called her son and, for the first time in many years, honestly told him she felt lonely and hurt, that he so rarely showed he cared. Her son was surprised, even a little bewildered, but he heard her. Physiologically, when we constantly suppress emotions, our muscles are in a state of chronic tension, especially the muscles of the neck, shoulders, and back. They are as if preparing for defense or flight from an invisible threat. This tension disrupts blood circulation, causes spasms and pain. Psychologically, acknowledging one's feelings and expressing them, even if just by voicing them to oneself or a trusted person, is like taking off that very sack of stones. Margaret slowly began to learn to talk about her needs, timidly at first, then more confidently. And, lo and behold, the pain in her shoulder began to recede. Not immediately, but gradually, she felt incredible relief. She had more energy. She even signed up for water aerobics, which she had long dreamed of. Listen to your body, especially your shoulders and back. Perhaps it's time for you too to shed some invisible, yet so heavy burden. Digestive problems, nervous stomach. The next signal, which very often goes unnoticed or is blamed on eating something wrong, is digestive problems, bloating, cramps, heartburn, constipation, or, conversely, diarrhea, especially if they occur without apparent reason or worsen in stressful situations. This is the classic nervous stomach or stress-induced bowel issues. Here's the story of Arthur, 72 years old. Arthur had always been a very responsible person, a perfectionist. Any important event, be it relatives visiting, a doctor's appointment, or even just the need to make an important call, would trigger an episode of a storm in his stomach. He would start worrying in advance, replaying all possible scenarios in his head, afraid of doing something wrong, letting someone down, disappointing them. He kept his anxieties to himself, considering it a sign of weakness. Men shouldn't whine, his father had once told him, and he had followed that rule all his life. He was used to controlling everything, and when a situation got out of control or was uncertain, his stomach would react immediately. He would take baking soda or digestive enzymes, but the relief was temporary. His wife would tell him, "Arthur, you worry too much about trivial things." But he would just brush it off. He felt his anxieties were his own business, and no one needed to know about them. It's not for nothing that our gut is called the second brain. It's directly connected to our nervous system via the gut-brain axis. When we experience stress, anxiety, or fear, but don't give these emotions an outlet, our brain sends signals to the digestive system. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are released, which can disrupt intestinal motility, the production of digestive juices, and alter the gut microbiome. Imagine unexpressed anxieties are like undigested pieces of food that get stuck and cause fermentation and discomfort. Psychologically, the stomach and intestines are very sensitive to our internal state. Suppressed fears, unvoiced worries, a feeling of loss of control, all these can settle in the stomach. Arthur, on the advice of a wise, old-school doctor, started keeping an anxiety journal. Every evening, he would write down everything that had bothered him during the day. Then he slowly began to share his worries with his wife, without fear of appearing weak. He was surprised to find that a voiced anxiety loses its sharpness, becomes smaller and less frightening, and his nervous stomach began to behave much more calmly. He even noticed he started sleeping better. Your stomach is a very sensitive barometer of your emotional state. If it often acts up, perhaps it's time to let out the anxieties you're so diligently trying to digest internally. Constant, unexplained fatigue. The third sign is chronic fatigue that doesn't go away even after rest. This isn't just ordinary sleepiness after a busy day. It's a profound, exhausting feeling of powerlessness, as if all your batteries have been removed. Let's recall Eleanor, 65 years old. After retiring, she dreamed of traveling, gardening, and meeting friends. But instead, she was overwhelmed by a wave of apathy and such fatigue that sometimes it was hard for her to even get out of bed. She underwent examinations, had tests done. Everything was within the age-related norm. "I'm just getting old," Eleanor thought bitterly. But it wasn't just about age. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and her children had grown up and were living their own lives. Eleanor felt lonely, unneeded, but she didn't admit it to anyone. She had always been a strong woman, a pillar of support for everyone. Crying, complaining, that wasn't her. She was used to hiding her pain, her sorrow, her disappointment behind a mask of cheerfulness and activity, until her strength finally deserted her. She remained silent about her greatest pain, the loss of meaning in life, the fear of the future. Suppressing strong emotions, especially those like grief, sadness, and disappointment, requires colossal internal resources. It's like constantly trying to hold a large, inflatable ball underwater. It keeps trying to surface, and you have to exert enormous effort to keep it down. This internal struggle exhausts the nervous system, leading to emotional burnout, which manifests as this kind of unremitting fatigue. Imagine your energy is a river, and unshed tears, unexpressed sadness. These are a dam blocking its flow. Psychologically, when we don't allow ourselves to experience and release difficult feelings, they remain inside like splinters, poisoning us and draining our life force. Eleanor, at her daughter's insistence, finally decided to join a support group for people who had experienced loss. There, in a safe and accepting environment, she was able to speak openly for the first time about her pain, her loneliness, her fears. She cried, a lot, and with every tear, with every spoken word, she felt a little lighter. The dam began to crumble, and the river of her energy slowly resumed its flow. The fatigue didn't disappear in a day, but it ceased to be all-consuming. Eleanor found strength for small tasks, then for bigger ones. She started smiling again. If fatigue has become your constant companion, despite sufficient sleep and rest, ask yourself, what important feelings am I so diligently hiding, even from myself? Maybe it's time to let them out to make room for new energy. Sleep disorders. The fourth cry of our body is problems with sleep. Difficulty falling asleep, frequent waking during the night, restless, superficial sleep. It seems you lie down, close your eyes, but thoughts in your head buzz like annoying flies and give you no peace. Meet James, 70 years old. James had always prided himself on sleeping like a baby, but for the last 6 months, sleep had become a real torture for him. He could toss and turn for hours, unable to fall asleep, or he would wake up at 3 to 4 a.m. and couldn't close his eyes again. The same thoughts spun in his head, worries about his health, his children, unfulfilled promises, minor grievances he hadn't voiced during the day. By day, James was a model of calmness and composure. He believed one shouldn't burden others with one's problems, that one needed to keep up appearances. He accumulated all his anxieties, doubts, and dissatisfactions within himself, and at night, like beasts released from a cage, they would begin their dance. He tried sleeping pills, but they only provided temporary relief and left him feeling drained in the morning. Our sleep is directly dependent on the state of our nervous system. If during the day we actively suppress certain thoughts and feelings, then at night, when conscious control weakens, they surface. It's like trying to lock a naughty child in a dark room. During the day, they sit quietly, but at night, they start banging on the door and demanding attention. Physiologically, unexpressed anxieties and unresolved internal conflicts maintain high levels of stress hormones, particularly cortisol, which interferes with the production of melatonin, the sleep hormone. Psychologically, our psyche tries to digest and process what we didn't pay attention to during the day. James, on the advice of a friend who had gone through something similar, developed a habit of dedicating 15 to 20 minutes before bed to an evening conversation with himself. He would take a notebook and simply write down everything that came to mind, all his worries, plans, resentments, gratitudes. Not for anyone else, but for himself. This helped unload thoughts from his head onto paper. He also began practicing a simple exercise. Before sleep, he would mentally forgive everyone he might hold a grudge against and ask for forgiveness from those he felt he might have offended. Gradually, his sleep began to improve. Thoughts no longer attacked him so persistently at night. He started waking up more rested and calm. If insomnia has become your frequent guest, perhaps your subconscious is trying to cry out to you at night about what you're silent about during the day. Try releasing your thoughts onto paper before bed, or simply have a heart-to-heart talk with yourself. Frequent headaches or migraines. The fifth signal, often underestimated and linked only to weather or blood pressure, is frequent headaches, especially tension headaches, or even migraines that appear seemingly out of nowhere. Let's recall Susan, 69 years old. Susan was a very gentle, non-confrontational person. She was terrified of offending someone, saying no, or expressing disagreement. It was easier for her to give in, to keep quiet, to do as others wanted, just to avoid the slightest hint of an argument or displeasure. But she paid for this outward compliance with frequent, agonizing headaches. Her head ached particularly badly after interacting with her assertive sister, who constantly imposed her opinions, or after visits from her grandchildren, when she had to adjust to their noisy games, even though she herself craved peace and quiet. Susan swallowed her irritation, her disagreement, her fatigue. She thought she was keeping the peace, but in reality, immense tension was building up inside her, like in an overheated boiler. Tension headache is literally a reflection of our internal tension. When we hold back anger, irritation, disagreement, our muscles, especially those in the neck, shoulders, and head, involuntarily contract. This leads to impaired blood supply to the brain, vascular spasms, and consequently, pain. It's as if you were constantly walking around with clenched fists. Sooner or later, your hands would start to hurt. Psychologically, unexpressed emotions, especially negative ones, seek an outlet. And if we don't give them a healthy outlet through words or actions, they can knock at our head. Susan, after long suffering, started seeing a psychologist. There, she learned to recognize her feelings, her boundaries, and, most importantly, to say no without guilt. It was very difficult for her, as if she were learning to walk all over again. She started small, declining invitations if she really didn't want to go, asking her grandchildren to play more quietly when she was tired, gently but firmly expressing her opinion to her sister. And her headaches began to appear less and less frequently. She felt as if an invisible but very tight band had been removed from her head. If your head often splits with pain, think about it. What words, what feelings are you bottling up inside? Maybe it's time to give them a voice, so your head stops being a battlefield for unexpressed emotions. Skin problems, itching, rashes, flare-ups of chronic conditions. The sixth and very visible signal from our body is various skin manifestations. Unexplained itching, sudden rashes, exacerbation of chronic skin diseases like eczema or psoriasis, especially if this coincides with periods of stress or internal tension. Our skin is the largest organ, and it reacts very sensitively to our emotional state. Let me tell you the story of David, 75 years old. David had suffered from eczema on his hands all his life. At times it would subside, but as soon as he got nervous, his hands would be covered in itchy, painful rashes. The eczema flared up particularly badly when he had disagreements with his adult son about running the family business, which David had handed over to him a few years prior. David saw that his son was making, in his opinion, wrong decisions, but he was afraid to interfere, not wanting to seem intrusive or spoil their relationship. He kept silent, but inside, he was seething with anxiety, disagreement, and a sense of powerlessness. And every time after such silent storms, his hands would bloom with a new wave of eczema. Doctors prescribed ointments and diets, but the effect was temporary because the root cause lay deeper. The skin and the nervous system are closely linked, even from the embryonic stage of development. Therefore, it's not surprising that stress, anxiety, and suppressed emotions can directly affect the condition of our skin. Physiologically, stress hormones can cause inflammatory reactions in the skin, disrupt its barrier function, and provoke itching. It's as if your skin becomes too sensitive to internal experiences. Psychologically, the skin is the boundary between our inner world and the outer world. And when this boundary is disturbed by unexpressed conflicts or unresolved problems, the skin can signal this through rashes or itching. David, tired of constant suffering, once decided to have a frank conversation with his son. He didn't criticize or lecture, but simply shared his concerns, his feelings, his experience. The conversation was not easy, but it happened. And, to David's surprise, his son not only listened to him, but also admitted some of his mistakes. After this conversation, for the first time in a long while, the eczema on David's hands began to noticeably subside. He felt as if a weight had been lifted from his soul and his skin. Our skin is a mirror of our internal state. If it speaks to you through itching, redness, or rashes, listen. What internal discomfort, what unexpressed feelings is it trying to inform you about? Feeling short of breath, lump in the throat, tightness in the chest. And finally, the seventh sign, which can be very alarming but is often linked specifically to suppressed emotions, after ruling out serious heart or lung diseases, of course, is the sensation of shortness of breath, as if it's difficult to take a full breath, a feeling of a lump in the throat, or tightness, pressure in the chest. Let me give you the example of Mary, 67 years old. Mary was a very caring grandmother. Her adult children often left their grandchildren with her, sometimes for long periods. Mary loved her grandchildren, but raising them took a lot of energy, and she also wanted to dedicate time to her own affairs, to rest. But she couldn't refuse her children. She was afraid of offending them, of seeming like a bad grandmother. And so, when she felt particularly tired and realized she would again have to postpone her plans for her grandchildren, she would get this unpleasant sensation, as if something was preventing her from breathing, squeezing her chest. She would start breathing frequently and shallowly, sometimes even developing a dry cough. Doctors examined her heart and lungs. Everything was normal. But Mary remained silent about her fatigue, her desire to be alone, the fact that it was hard for her. When we hold back strong emotions, whether it's resentment, anger, fear, or even just the unexpressed desire to rest, our body reacts with tension. The diaphragm muscles, the intercostal muscles can spasm, making deep breathing difficult. A lump in the throat is often a spasm of the laryngeal muscles, which occurs when we swallow words we desperately want but don't dare to say. It's as if the body is literally preventing us from speaking out. Physiologically, this can be a manifestation of the autonomic nervous system's response to stress, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, preparing us for fight or flight, even if the threat is purely psychological. Psychologically, The sensation of shortness of breath can symbolize a lack of personal space, an inability to breathe freely due to the burden of unexpressed needs or responsibilities. Mary, on the advice of a friend, started practicing breathing exercises. Then, summoning her courage, she talked to her children. She explained that she loved them very much and was happy to help with the grandchildren, but she also needed rest and time for herself. To her surprise, her children were understanding, and it became much easier for her to breathe, both literally and figuratively. If you often feel short of breath and doctors find no cause, or if a lump in your throat makes it hard to speak, perhaps it's your soul asking for a breath of freedom. What words, what desires are stuck inside you, preventing you from breathing deeply? My dears, we have looked at 7 very important signals by which our wise body tries to reach us. This doesn't mean you should immediately diagnose yourselves or self-medicate. Of course not. But it is a reason to pause, to listen to yourselves more deeply. Your life experience, your wisdom, these are priceless gifts. And you, more than anyone, deserve to live in harmony with yourselves, to feel good not only physically, but also emotionally at any age. Remember that your feelings, your thoughts, your needs are important. Don't be afraid to talk about them, at least to yourselves at first. Don't be afraid to ask for help or support if you need it. This is not weakness, but a manifestation of love and respect for yourself. It's never too late to start. Small steps towards yourself can bring immense relief and joy. You have every right to be heard, and first and foremost, for you to hear yourself. Believe in your strength, in the wisdom of your body, and it will surely respond with gratitude. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.